What's up, guys? I'm Dan Maffitt, and I'm here with Matthew Braga at Dropbox headquarters. Thanks for coming here and being with us today.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you for having me.
All right, man. Maybe just take a second and just kind of introduce yourself and what you do and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Matthew Braga. I work here at Dropbox. My official title is head of editorial, but that essentially just means that I help manage some of our various blogs. So we've got a blog where we write about the stuff that our engineers are cooking up. We've got a blog where we write about company news and some more kind of work culture stories. And then as part of that, I also host a podcast that we have here called Working Smarter, which is all about how people in various creative fields or people that you wouldn't expect are using AI in their day-to-day lives to, get their work done and basically make more time for the stuff that matters most to them. So it's a bit of a grab bag, but it's fun stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good conversation piece because everyone's using AI
totally
in some form, and it's optimizing. That's what it's all about.
Yep, exactly.
So I guess we can just dive right into it and find out a little bit about how you create your own voice when you're telling a story, when you're writing a piece, as opposed to like just reporting something.
Yeah, of course. So prior to coming to Dropbox, I was in journalism for over a decade and wore a bunch of different hats during that time. So there were periods where I was writing for newspapers, writing for magazines, spent a little bit of time doing broadcast work for TV and podcasts. And I would say that as the years went on, I've always really loved language. I've really loved how magazine writers in particular, how they create, these how they weave these narratives, these stories. They create scenes. They really kind of spend time with characters, trying to build a world that really makes you feel like you're kind of there and you're with these people and you're essentially in the mix. And so I think as time has gone on, I've really been drawn to how can I create and write things that let me bring a little bit more of that in, because one of the things that I think I really enjoy about either writing essays, which is something that I've done a little bit later in my career, some of this podcast work that I've done, some of the stuff even with Dropbox, right, is that the way that I see the world and that I think about things, the things that I'm drawn to is going to be very different from the way that you see the world and the way that you're drawn to things. And so I think that's become very important to me, is just how can I weave a little bit of that in? Because I think that's what, when we talk about our work as creatives, that's the sort of stuff that I think sets us all apart from others, right? It's what we bring to the table that's unique to us. And so nowadays I really try to find that balance. How can I kind of bring some of that journalistic rigor into the work that I do while also bringing into some of that, kind of unique worldview creativity that I think I really like to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because whatever craft you're doing, whatever your craft is, your influences you bring to the table are going to be wildly different than anyone else.
Totally. And this was always the thing that, there'd be sort of in the journalism era, there would be stories that I would work on sometimes where, I'll give you one example. I wrote about it was someone who was doing research on, this is going to be a little gnarly, but they were studying the decomposition of undersea life. And so they would take these pigs that had died and they would put them underneath the water and have cameras to watch how they decomposed.
Yeah.
And I went to this researcher and I was like, I think this work is really cool. I want to write about it, not for Nature Science Journal or something like that, but I want to write about it for a literary magazine. And I think that was sort of a bit of a, we got there in the end, but I think at first that request was kind of confusing, because why would people who read a literary magazine be interested in
rotting
decomposing dead pigs at the bottom of the ocean? But I think that's a perfect example of that, of just there was something that I found interesting about that and poignant about that, and was able to kind of tie it into sort of some larger thoughts around sort of the environment and ocean and climate, and tied it all together in a way that made sense to me, but sometimes it just doesn't connect to other people in the same way. But that's, I think, what makes that unique, right?
Yeah, that's kind of part of that craft, is connecting an unlikely source to an unlikely recipient.
Exactly. Yes.
Making that connection in some way.
Totally, 100%.
And the art there is being able to craft those words in a way to tie it in.
That's always the thing that gives me, I think, a little bit of, maybe peace isn't the right word, but there have been a lot of situations where I'll have an idea in mind, I'll be researching a story or thinking about writing something, and someone else will get to it first.
Yeah.
And it's like you go through the stages of grief where you're like, oh crap, like somebody else wrote this before me, I'm not going to be able to like pitch this anywhere now, I'm not going to be able to write it. And then once that period passes, you kind of have a moment where you're like, well, wait a second, like this other person wrote this, I'm just going to use ocean science again for an example, right? This other person wrote this ocean science story, but it doesn't mean they're going to approach it in the same way as me. Maybe they're not going to talk to the same people or go to the same places. Like there's still something unique that you can kind of bring to the table. And that's always kind of, I think, just with anything, how I try to approach, I think, storytelling, whether it's at like Dropbox, whether it's like sort of the stuff that I've done as a journalist and a writer. It's just like, what can you do that nobody else can do? And I think that really just helps set the stories you tell apart.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's in any craft, any art form that you do, it's always about just being a little bit different, and that kind of leads me into my next question. And what this whole podcast is about is thinking out of the box, thinking differently than the norm. And I find that creatives in general are the out of the box problem solvers. How do you approach something that you're going to write about and think outside the box? Like, what does that mean to you to be able to think outside?
Yeah, I can give you a tangible example. Oftentimes I read a lot. Like that's where I find like I get the bulk of my ideas is I'll read other magazine stories or frankly, I mean, it's not even just reading. It can be, like watching Real Housewives or, like going to see a movie or something. Like there's just always sort of things percolating. And I think for me, it'll be like the quintessential way is like I'll be reading a magazine story and there'll be like a throwaway line. Like the story will be about like something totally different. And then there'll just be like a throwaway line about like, it'll be a story about, I'm just gonna like make up a hypothetical example, like I don't know, a story about like electric cars in America, and there'll be like a throwaway example about like, I don't know, a cactus that only exists in like one part of the world. And like that's the sort of thing that I always zero in on, and I go like, wait, I want to know more about that. Like I want a story about that thing. And so I offer that up just as sort of I'm always looking for like inspiration and ideas and like sort of those little asides, kind of like the in-between places, like the gaps, the things that I don't see anywhere else, I guess is a good way to put it. And so, that I think the example with the pigs is a great example from, my personal kind of journalism work and writing work. Even on the Dropbox side, so I think I mentioned off the top, we've been working on this podcast internally called Working Smarter. I mean, I say working on it internally, but anybody can listen to it. You can find it on wherever you get your podcasts, as we say. And the way that we kind of approached this, I think, was very similar, where we knew we wanted to do a podcast about how real people are using AI to do their jobs. But, we didn't want it to just sort of be like, okay, like we're going to have someone sit down and tell us like, here are the prompts that I use when like working with an LLM or a chatbot. I think we really wanted to get into like, no, like what is it that you love about your job? What is it that like makes you feel creative? What is it that really kind of gets you out of bed in the morning? And I think that approach was really different to a lot of the other AI podcasts that I heard, because it really tried to center the humans and the people who are like at the center of these stories. Like we talked to a chef that kind of talked all about like what he loves about being a chef, what he loves about the work he does, the team that he works with, and the AI tools that he used was kind of a supporting part of that. That was like, it wasn't, every episode wasn't about tools for the sake of tools or technology for the sake of tools. It was about, how do these tools enable these people to kind of do the creative work they do. And so anyways, I just offer that as another example of like always approaching, whether it's like work for Dropbox or work for I do for myself, just trying to think of like, what is a different way in which we can approach this? Like, what is a way that I haven't seen anybody else kind of do this in a podcast or a magazine story, et cetera, and trying to take that approach.
Yeah. I mean, that's the best way to do it is, look at something that's been done and figure out how to do it differently. Because the same story can be told, half a dozen times the exact same way, but it takes one person to kind of stretch that and find a new perspective on it.
Yes. I mean, there was another good example of that was I never actually ended up publishing it or reporting it out, but there's a class of story I love, which is that every couple of years someone will write about like farmers are trying to grow like a new type of apple or a new type of blueberry or a new, and this is like an example of a story that you see done like almost every year someone will do a variation on this. But I think it has almost like limitless storytelling potential because there's so many different types of fruits, there's so many different types of climates, there's so many different types of ways in which you can tell that story, different characters, different locations. And so I think that was always at the back of my mind where I was like, yeah, I've read a version of this story for apples or blueberries, but trying to find a different way in was always kind of I did a bunch of research on this and for various reasons never brought it to publication. But again, another great example of even stuff that people have ostensibly done 100 times before, you can always find a new way in. And that's kind of what I love about storytelling just across the board.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'm listening to you talk about researching different avenues and ideas and things, diving down the rabbit hole, researching a subject and never getting to publication. That's in my mind, I do that with sketches, digital sketchbook and drawing ideas and sketching out. I have notebooks and notebooks like these that I take everywhere, and they're just full of ideas that I want to make that I don't ever get to.
Yes.
So is that your sketchbook is researching ideas, writing down, topics and things like that?
Yes, absolutely. And, in the moment when you have an idea that doesn't come to fruition, it always kind of sucks a little bit. You're what could I have done differently? Why didn't it work? Et cetera, et cetera. But I think looking back, and this is one of those things that I think I've made a little bit more peace with as I've gotten older and as I've done this more, is even going through the process, there's never wasted effort. Even doing all that research and just having it live in a notes file somewhere in my computer or somewhere in my notebook. You never know how those ideas pop up again later on. You never know how someone you talk to for one story that doesn't work out can somehow resurface later on. And so that's at least the mindset that I always try to take with this stuff is the work is never it's never for nothing. It always somehow feeds back into what you do in some way, right? Even if it's just a learning experience of I learned something new about how I went about approaching the story, even if it didn't lead to anything. And so that's what I always try to tell myself, right? For better or for worse.
Yeah, it's always just leading to the final result in some way. Like Edison, he always says that he didn't fail making a light bulb. A couple thousand times. He figured out 1,000 ways not to make it. So
I like that.
It's everything leads that direction. So
yes.
Whatever the path that takes you there is what matters. So how do you guard yourself against just doing safe work and not pushing yourself to do more, I don't want to say risky topics, but just pushing yourself to do topics that aren't the norm and guarding yourself again from doubting yourself and doing those more advanced topics or controversial or whatever it would be in the writing world?
I think it's a mix of a couple of things. I think one of them is a little bit of what we've talked about before, is looking around and not wanting to just tell the same story or a variation on a story that other people have told. I'm from Toronto, Canada, and this is sort of I don't know if this is a uniquely Canadian thing, but a lot of Canadian publications will do this thing often where they will just write the Canadian version of a story that someone in the U.S. did. So there'll be a trend in the U.S. and and this used to happen all the time when I used to work at the public broadcaster, the CBC that we had, or the Globe and Mail or other places. And no shade to them, right? There's a service, I think, in trying to find the Canadian version of a trend that's happening elsewhere.
Right.
But I always found those stories a little, I never loved doing them because it was sort of just is there a way that we can push this forward? Is there a way that we can do something different? And so that I think is one kind of, it takes more work, which is why people don't do it.
Right.
But I think that's always been one kind of guiding aspect, is just how can I push something forward a little bit or do something a little different or find someone new to talk to. And so I think that's kind of one element of it. I think even just to your point about trying to push boundaries and try things that are new, I think it's a mix of there have been times when I have tried to do something so out of my comfort zone, so unfamiliar, that it ends up failing because it's just it's too new, you're too out of your depth.
It's a big reach.
It's a big reach. And so I find there's almost a middle ground that you need to kind of come at, where you are, there's just enough familiarity that maybe it's still kind of sort of related to a topic that I'd done before, but I'm trying to approach it in a, a really good example of this is like, I used to be like a technology reporter for a long time and a business reporter. And as I kind of branched out more over the years into maybe more generalist stuff and more kind of culture reporting and stuff that was like, mainstream's not the right word, but like, wanted to find like a larger audience for some of this stuff. Yeah. I found that still having like a little bit of like a nugget of technology in there grounded me a little bit, where it was like, okay, at least like there's something that I understand here, but I'm also trying to push myself to do something.
It's like a stepping off point.
Yeah. And also the last thing I'll say as well is like having other people that you can talk to who have done what you want to do is also really, really helpful. Like being able to go to like friends and other people in the industry and say like, hey, I've never really done this type of story before, or I've never really done, like this type of podcast before, or this type of like whatever what have you, is really, really helpful. And I think also really, really important. I mean, when I worked at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, that was such a great example of that, because like I would spend a lot of my time, like writing these stories that would live on the website. But because we were a broadcaster, we also had people who did podcasts, they did radio, and like so many different types of radio. There were people who would do like, the 1 hour current affairs shows, or like, they would specialize in doing like the 5-minute news hits. And anytime I was kind of asked to do something that was maybe a little different or a little out of my depth, there were always people who had done that you could talk to and like go to and use as a resource. And so that's just also really, really important if you have that and you can find that.
Yeah, it's almost like a mentor, guiding light, so to speak. Someone you could tap for inspiration.
And maybe not even something that formal. Like I found that like I didn't always have like mentors in that sense, but even just someone who like had done the type of story that, or the type of format that you were being asked to do, and just being able to go to them and just say like, hey, do you have any tips? Maybe it's not like a protracted engagement where I meet with them every week or every month or anything like that, but just a little bit of a resource. Always very helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. Mm-hmm. Now, like, what would you say to a creative in the writing world, journalistic world, if their voice that they have, that they've curated or developed, doesn't fit like current trends in the media? Like, is it like, like social media and art where there are trending things that kind of do well, or is it they should still stay with their own voice stronger than anything?
I would say that when you are genuinely interested in something, like when you find something that really kind of like resonates with you, or a niche that you're actually passionate about, like you can tell, like the authenticity is like really comes through, I think, when you find something that you enjoy doing. And I think I've learned this firsthand, where it's like the stories that I have found the most enjoyable have been the ones that have like tapped into something that I have been passionate about. And so, it's always a balance, right? Like I think on the one hand, it's like you don't want to write something that is like so esoteric and so niche and so specific that like no one's going to read it and no one's going to care. But on the other hand, it's like there's a way that I think you can take like a little bit of maybe a wider or mainstream sensibility and combine it with stuff that matters to you. I mean, I'll give you a good example of this, like within the Dropbox context. So I mentioned that one of my roles here is head of editorial, as I oversee our blogs. And prior to that, I actually used to do a lot of writing for our blogs. And so we have this blog called Work in Progress, where I used to describe it to people as almost like an online kind of like culture magazine, where we'd write about modern work and technology and just how like changes in technology were affecting the way we worked. And my approach to these stories were always, how can I find something that I am interested in, and then like combine it with things that we are interested in at Dropbox. And so I would say one of the best examples of that is, I did a story that was all about the resurgence of like vinyl record pressing plants.
Yeah.
Because like I like music, I like technology obviously, and own a lot of vinyl records. And this was such like a great example of that, because one of the things I think at Dropbox that we're very we've been focused on for quite a number of years, right? Going back to like the early days of cloud syncing and sharing and organizing your files, is this idea of like, how can you organize all of the information that you need to do your job? Like, how can you make sense of it? How can you find what you need to do your job? It's something that's like really important to what we're doing now with Dropbox Dash, this like AI assistant and tool that we've been building, right? It lets you kind of search through basically all of your company knowledge and find what you need so that you can do the stuff that matters to you. And so Why am I explaining all this? Well, like the thing that struck me, I think with kind of record pressing and all these vinyl like plants that were emerging was that it was kind of this like arcane lost art that like nobody knew how to do it anymore. Everybody had to learn it from scratch, and it was like very reliant on kind of doing like an analog version of what we do at Dropbox. Is like you're trying to find like the people and the information and the sources that can teach you how to like get a record plant up and going again. Yeah. So I talked to all these people about like all of the work that they had to do to like find the manuals for these old record pressing plants or these like record pressing machines that like no one had used in 30, 40 years. And so they're like trying to find these manuals and they're trying to find these notes that this like one guy who used to work for like Polydor or something, you know, like, and so it was like a great example, I think, of a way to just like marry those two things together, you know, organizing, finding, sharing information on the Dropbox side, and then also all of these people who were trying to do a similar thing within their little kind of industry. And so there's ways you can do it. It's just like, you know, I think you got to think a little bit of outside of the box sometimes around like what is the story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's cool that you talked about vinyl pressing too, because one of my friends who lives down the road from me, Kenny Dope, he has a vinyl pressing machine. That's cool. And he bought this facility that went out in New Jersey. He bought all of their old machines.
Oh, so he's got
he's got a bunch of pallets that we're trying to reverse engineer.
Neat.
To make stamping. He's got a brand new one that just was made.
Yep.
Actually in Canada.
Oh, it's one of the viral machines?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that story was so cool because we got to talk to the viral folks. I can't remember if we talked to or if I just researched, but like the company that used to make a lot of these in Germany is like, you know, building them again for like the old machines. They're just running them off the line again. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. We did a run of about 245s.
Nice.
Like last month, where we just got the machine running and chiller set up, and it's an incredible system. With that said, and I know you touched on it a little bit when you talked about like Dropbox AI and AI in general. How do you feel about AI being kind of a real big player in the creative world? And just workflow in general. I mean, I know I personally use AI a lot. It's, again, I always like to tell people it's the best personal assistant you could ever have in your life.
Yeah.
And Dash specifically I use a lot to help organize things, find files, process things. I know I fed it your bio and your website for this. And it populated a list of questions that I should ask you. You know, things, talking points that I weren't thinking of. And I love it. I think it's fantastic. I have friends that despise it because they're, you know, fine artists that think that it's ruining the market. I disagree with that. I think it's just like any other tool that's ever come along. Everyone's got a pen and paper, but there's very few great stories ever written. So I don't think that's going to replace anything like that. But how do you feel about AI optimizing workflows, coming into like every marketplace?
I think the point that you made a second ago about it being a tool, I think is very much how we think about it here at Dropbox, and even just like how I have used it within some of the work that I have done here. I think that tracks, you know. One of the things I think we talk about a lot when we talk about Dropbox Dash is just this idea that it really is sort of like it's like an AI teammate. Like it's something that can kind of assist and help you with your work. It's not going to do the job for you. It's not going to, you know, come up with the ideas necessarily or like, you know, create the actual work, but it's going to help you get to that final product. Much as, you know, the way that a member of your team kind of might do. And so, you know, there's lots of ways I think in which that kind of manifests, and certainly some of the work that we do here, like with the podcast that we worked on, Working Smarter. You know, AI, we definitely used it throughout the creative process on a couple of dimensions. You know, I know that we used a tool called Descript, for example, which is often used for like generating transcripts, but can also kind of like remove like filler words and take some of that kind of like busy work, I guess, you know, drudge work, as you know, as you would say, out of the process, which I think tracks a lot with like how we think about Dash. Like, how can you use AI to really take a lot of that work that you just like, you could do it yourself. Like you could sit down and like open up a waveform and remove all the ahs and all the pauses and all that. Like it's not like you can't do that.
No, it's a remedial task.
Exactly. And the fact that you now have tools that can do that frees you up to spend more of your time maybe like tinkering on a script or focusing on like an intro or like doing some of the sound design, like stuff that like you really kind of need like your human creative brain to use. And so that's always the thing that we tell folks about Dash is like, if you have a tool that lets you find the knowledge that you're looking for, like it answers about your work, organize stuff more easily, and do all of those things together, then hopefully, like ideally, that leaves you more time for a lot of that creative work. And so I think we definitely saw that with some of the podcast episodes. I know my producer, for example, when he would sit down and do pre-interviews with our guests, he would have an AI tool running that would record the conversation, then it would summarize it. And it was really, really handy to later on just like get these summaries of like, hey, here's what we talked about. Here's what the guest said that they could talk about. Here are my suggestions on like where we could kind of go with the episode. I know there were a couple of cases as well where, we never actually used it to like write scripts per se, because like, there's always like unique ways in which like this is sort of what I went back to earlier, right? There's always going to be a way that's unique to you that, you want to approach a story, a script, like, how you want to set something up, or the way that you want to introduce a guest. But there were still cases where, we'd have this whole transcript of the episode and, the like producers on the podcast would use AI tools just to kind of like get some thought starters going. Like, what are some ways that we could kind of get in to the narration or the setup for this episode? What are the most important bits that we could kind of pull out for the intro and the extra, et cetera? A lot of times, maybe we'd take it or leave it, usually leave it, but like it still kind of just like gets your brain thinking with some of that stuff. And so that's really important. One thing I'll add as well, on this front too, that I think was really, really helpful is, I mentioned sort of Dash does a lot around the organizing piece and like really trying to like make sense of all of the content that goes into like making a podcast or a creative project. And so Dash has a feature called Stacks, which, we often kind of describe as like, it's like a living container or like a workspace or like the best way to kind of describe it to folks is like in the way that playlists, like Spotify has like playlists for songs, or, your browser has like bookmarks for all like your links and things. But, Stacks is kind of like a container that can hold everything. Like you can throw an audio file in there, you can throw the image assets you need for each episode. You can throw your scripts in there. And so I personally actually use Stacks a lot when we were creating the episodes to keep all of that straight, because there's so many things that go into making an episode, and being able to have like one place where all of that could live was really, really helpful, because it meant that anytime I needed to look up like a script, or a like a marketing plan or like all the other things that we kind of needed to bring this podcast to life, I knew it was all in one place, and so that was really helpful.
Yeah, I really like Stacks, especially planning this. Was my first use with Dash in general for planning something, and being able to integrate like my Gmail and all these other assets. I could just tag the email over, the attachments over, drop them all into a stack, and then recall later. I was trying to remember where a file was, and I couldn't remember where I put it.
Yes.
I'm horribly organized on most things. So I went to Dash, like, wait, no, this is what it's for. I can do this. And I type in what I'm looking for, and it populated like everything I was looking for. It's like, hey, you mentioned that and all of these things. I'm like, oh, yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
And it's just workflow-wise, instead of going over to Gmail, going through, searching, hoping I can find it, dive through the all the rows of responses and find exactly what I was looking for.
Yes. Honestly, the fact that Dash can search within content is honestly like so powerful, because it means that, and this happened a lot with the podcast, where I would sit there and I wouldn't remember the name of, I don't know, like other people would be creating documents, right? And so someone else would be responsible for creating the, I don't know, like the show binder or like the marketing tracker. And I could like never remember the file names for these documents. And so I would always just kind of search like, I don't know, like marketing plan, or like plug in like, what I knew was in an episode if I couldn't remember the title of and it would always get pulled up. And that was so helpful, because, I don't know. I don't know if you're like me, but it's like, I have never been great about organizing files and folders.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of nice in a way that like you now have this tool that sort of just sidesteps all that and says like, it's okay, it's fine.
Yeah,
like if you're bad at organizing things, like I will find the things you need. And so it really does help you just like jump into the work a lot faster.
Yeah, I need all the help I can get with organizing. I'm awful at it. I'm a true creative through and through with that. Like, it's a mess. My Dropbox is an I've got 8 terabytes of just mess.
Yes, yes.
I've tried to do really good, and I have like systematic stuff that are really well organized. But then as it gets subfolder to subfolder, it just gets worse and worse.
Yes. Well, and the thing we've started like telling, creative customers and like folks who do a lot of the work that like you do and that we do, who work with like videos and photos in particular, I know that they've been adding support for basically like multimodal search into Dash. So this idea that, it's not just text, you can also search through like videos and photos and audio. And so for me, like the audio part was, I think, most relevant like when I was working on the podcast. But I think we're already hearing from folks who do like a lot of like multimedia and like video production work, like being able to search within photos and within videos, I think is going to be a real boon as well.
Yeah, that's going to be a huge game changer.
Like being able to sit down. I don't know if like you can identify with this, but like when I used to work in broadcast, the systems that we had for searching through, we would go out and we would like, even for like a 5-minute TV spot, you might go out and shoot like hours of footage, and then you bring it all back and you dump it all in and you ingest it, and just like you like manually have to like sit there and scrub through, and someone would leave little kind of like flags and notes to be able to say like, okay, this is the shot where like, okay, we entered the building, and like this is the shot where like, we go and we like shake the person's hand and like da-da-da-da-da-da, and just like being able to get to a point soon, I think, with Dash, where you're able to sit down and just say like, hey, find me the scene with like the green chair, or like like that. I think is going to be a big deal.
That's going to be really cool, because I used to do that with Replay. On Dropbox, I had Replay, and we'd shoot something, and I'd have editors. We'd go through the edit, and then I'd send it out and say, put your notes on it, and then they would, flag it, put markers on timestamps, and then you still have to go through. And it was expedient from previous work use, but now if that becomes a thing, that is going to be another step forward too.
Yes.
So with all that said, what's shaping your creative process now? Like what tools, what vibe, what kind of space do you have? Like what fuels your creativity?
This is going to sound a little counterintuitive given all that we just talked about, but I still write so many things down on paper. Like even coming here, I had some like things that I wanted to kind of remind myself to talk about that I typed out on my computer, but then before we sat down, I still wrote them down on a little piece of paper, just because there's something about, and we've even written about this on our Dropbox, on Work in Progress, our Dropbox blog as well, where there's just something about writing and the way that it like forces your brain to remember things that is just different than things on a screen. And so that is something that frankly is just really important. Like I'm always jotting down notes. I've always got like some kind of scrap of paper going, which I find very, very helpful. And then later on, of course, like I'm putting all that into the computer. I'm usually like
digitizing it,
digitizing it in some degree. And so like that is one area where I think having AI tools that can allow you to search through all that is definitely helpful, right? Because again, it's like when you're writing stuff down, you're not always, it's probably when you're like least thinking about like organizing things and like keeping everything neat and tidy. And so I think there's been a lot of cases of that where it's just like pouring all my notes into the computer, being able to search them later with AI. And tools like Dash, I think, is really, really helpful. But honestly, more broadly, I would say like my tools of the trade are quite straightforward. It's like I'm basically just like using like a couple of different kind of writing apps for like kind of keeping track of all my notes and my ideas and things like that. And it's a grab bag, right? It's like everything from I'm using Dropbox Paper at work. I'm using Notion sometimes as well for a lot of personal stuff, frankly, like, my grocery list lives in Notion. I use another app called Ulysses, which doesn't really have any like fancy AI anything to it. It's just like a place that I sit and focus and write in.
All the tools you mentioned there for creativity are incredible. I know everyone has a tool that helps them manage and mitigate their creative process. What kind of things in your creative space make you feel the most creative? Is it a vibe? Is it a room, a chair? Like,
yes. I mean, honestly, having like a nice quiet, like my ideal workspace, frankly, is like just kind of being at home at my desk, having a cup of coffee. Like maybe it's, I don't like writing as much in the summer when it gets kind of hot. I like fall and winter where it's like I can have like a cozy sweater on and a blanket and just like sit.
Yeah, full write. Winston Churchill.
Yeah, exactly. It feels very like just kind of cozy writing kind of setup. But like that I think is my ideal, but I've also learned that like I can't be in the same space all the time. Like I have to get out of the house sometimes. Like I work from home. And so being able to like go to a library or a coffee shop or just like another place, I think even just like a change of scenery in the house, like moving from, like my office desk to the couch, oftentimes is very important. But, I think just like having a like nice quiet space where I can focus is definitely a big part of it. I think making time to read, as like kind of silly and basic as that sounds, is, at least for me, like I find very important. Times where I start to feel maybe like a little, I don't know, like maybe a little anxious or just a little sort of like uninspired or tapped out, and like I kind of start to spiral, and you kind of get into this like mode of, oh my god, like will I ever come up with a good idea again, like what is going on? And then usually in those moments I kind of remind myself like, oh, you just like you haven't written it, like, or you haven't read anything in like a couple of days because you've been so busy. Like carve out a bit of time this morning to like go crack open a book that you love, or a new magazine issue or something. And so that I often find is like a very grounding, inspiring kind of force as well. Both like reading things that are new, but also returning to like books that I just find like helpful and
that inspired you in the past.
Exactly, right. It's like, I mean, there's this one. She's like a poet and an author named Lydia Davis, and I find I often like open up her like collected works of short stories pretty often, just because it's like there's always something new waiting for me there whenever I'm reading her works, and I think it just reminds me of like everything that I love about like writing and telling stories, and especially short stories, right? It's like it's a reminder of there's been like variations on people who have said this, right? But it's like easy to sit down and like write 4,000 words, but it's like really hard to sit down and write 400 words because you have to be so thoughtful with like your approach and your
everything's
language.
Concise.
Exactly. So it's it's a little bit of the environment, it's a little bit of the inspiration. Honestly, like I think I have learned that like when it feels like I'm kind of like bashing myself up, like my head against the wall, I don't always have the luxury of time, but being able to like really just like put something down and step away,
walk away,
is just like so helpful. Like truly like sitting down and just being like, I'm just gonna throw on some reality TV or throw on some like just something
mind-numbing,
like, something totally, or maybe not even mind-numbing, but just like totally different from like what I am doing in my day-to-day, and I find that's also really helpful. The last couple of we're talking now in I guess November, and spent most of October watching like World Series baseball because the Toronto Blue Jays were in the World Series. And like that was such a nice, like, didn't matter how hard or difficult a day I had with like writing or work or creative work. It was just sort of like being able to go and watch baseball at night was such like, it was like total shift, total 180. And so I, stuff like that I also find nice as well. Like just getting out into the world and doing something different that's a little outside of your routine to shake things up.
Yeah, that's absolutely how I do it too. Like I have different spaces in my house that I do different things. I have like an office. My office is where I do all my editing. In the corner of my office, I have like a workstation where I do anything that's like painting or gluing or anything like that. My shop at the house has like all my automotive stuff. So that's like where I do my creative stuff out there, where we film the show. My basement is the workshop. It's got, some woodworking stuff. It's got a heat press, a 3D printer, laser. So like I can change my location as the day goes if I get stuck. And I know it sounds so silly, but one of my friends who's a really talented artist in Europe, he told me this one day. I had like a writer's block. I couldn't figure out what to do. And he just says, do a handstand. I was like, what? He's like, do a handstand against your wall for like 30 seconds.
Jeez.
And I did it, and then I was so focused on this handstand and like how stupid it was to do this handstand. When I got done trying to do a handstand, the idea just came to me.
Yeah.
And it was because I disconnected every creative thought I had into this other thing. And then when I got done this stupid thing, I was like, oh, I got it.
Yes. I mean, I love nothing more than going for like a run in the middle of the day, because it just like it really does force you to just like focus on something totally different, totally separate. And I think there's a big reason why you hear this from a lot of writers. Like a lot of writers talk about how like writing and running seem to kind of go hand in hand because, running is thinking time, right? It's like it's a way to kind of like turn a problem over and really kind of focus on something else for a bit, which I certainly identify with. That tracks for me.
I don't run, but I like driving.
Yes.
I'm too big to run, but I like driving. Driving is like my time where I can zone out and really think about things.
No, I am honestly also the same. Like I love nothing more than I love road trips because it is basically like a car to me is just like a big stereo on wheels.
Yes.
And so having like a 3-4 hour drive, I've actually got one coming up in a week or so. And I'm excited because it just means I'm just gonna like load it up with like albums and things that I haven't listened to yet or haven't listened to in a while, and away we go.
Yeah, I refer to my truck, that's my daily driver, as my think tank. Because I just have voice memos and I'm just driving, saying things, putting it down. I'll listen to them later or read them later, and I'm like, what was I thinking? What is that even?
Oh yeah, I definitely have my fair share of this. I've gone on a couple of reporting trips where part of the like magazine story that I'm working on or whatever involves like a bit of a you want to get a sense of scene in, a sense of location, and so I have all these random voice notes of me like driving through like up northern Michigan and just like voice notes about like all the things I'm seeing along the way, and it's a fun way to do this work.
That's awesome. Well, I mean that's about all I got for you today. I mean, are there any final thoughts or anything you want to talk about before we wrap?
I mean, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I think just like reiterating this idea of like AI and technology as like it's a tool like anything else. And I think that's an important thing to kind of remember with a lot of the conversations that are happening right now about creative work and AI. It's another tool in your toolbox. It's something that I think is it can be an assistive force. It can be helpful. Again, like we sometimes refer to it as like an AI teammate in that sense, because it's not supposed to be doing the work for you. It's supposed to help you ultimately do the work. And that's the thing I think I always return to is like there are things about the way that you and I and like creative people generally do their work that only you can do. And that I think at the end of the day is ultimately like the goal of these tools is to like just create more space and more focus for you to be able to do that stuff, rather than really trying to like insert it into your creative process in a way that like feels like it's taking something away from you.
It's not intrusive.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of a supporting a supportive force, or you refer to it as a personal assistant, or or it's a helper, or an AI teammate, whatever you want to call it, right? But I think that's just the thing that we always certainly think about with Dropbox with Dash and its utility, and I think something that I always keep in mind when doing work here as well. Yeah,
I couldn't agree with that more. That's I'm always an early adapter to technology. I love tech. I love advancements in any way, shape, or form. And AI is one of those things that I dove in pretty early. And almost immediately I saw the benefit of having it in my workflow. I even will do sketches and scan them into like ChatGPT and say, hey, make 4 variations of this in a color scheme. Here's my palette. What do you think of these? And it'll just spit out like my sketch and all these different color palettes.
Right.
And it would have taken me half a day to render all of those variations. But now I've got it quick, concise. I can quickly see which one I like the most, and then I can do the rendering myself.
Yes.
But it's expediting the process, especially for me being a freelancer full time. Time is money. So if I can get to the final result faster, that saves me time and money, which means my clients are saved time and money, and we can progress to the next project even quicker.
Yeah, no, I agree. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and when we talked about it a lot, but Dash is part of that workflow and that ecosystem that's optimizing what we do every day. So I love it. I think that's it, man. I appreciate you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for
having me out. I mean, this is Dropbox headquarters. It's pretty awesome.
Thanks for having me. I mean, this has been a lot of fun, so I appreciate the chance to chat.
Of course. Do you have any social media you'd like to plug where people can follow your work? Or
if people are interested, I would say check out Working Smarter. That's the AI podcast that we've been doing at Dropbox. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, etc. Or you can also visit workingsmarter.ai.
Perfect.
And so the feeds are all linked there. We've got past stories. You can listen to episodes from past seasons. And so I would say that's a great place to look. And then also, if folks are interested in learning more about Dash, they can go to dropbox.com/dash. And that's where they can learn more about the product and how it works. If there are any creative teams listening to this, you can sign up for a free trial of Dash as well, and check that out and learn more.
That's a great place for everyone to find out about Dash and all those infos. But we also have a webinar coming up with Dropbox.
Yes, yeah, that's right. So if you want to learn more about Dropbox Dash and some of the ways that creative teams can use the product in their own workflows, we're going to be having a webinar on December 16th that starts at 9 a.m. Pacific, and you can find more at events.dropbox.com.
I'm excited for that. I'm excited to dive in a little bit into what Dropbox offers with Dash.
And if it wasn't clear, this webinar will be between myself and Dan. So
yes,
definitely.
I'll be back.
Yes, try to tune in.
Yes, try to tune in. Everyone, thanks for watching. Matt, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Dan.